It was a crisp Saturday morning in Savannah when the letter arrived, thick cream stock, stamped with the Department of Homeland Security seal. The old man spotted it before his grandson did. Morgan Freeman sat alone on his wraparound porch, a ceramic mug cradled in both hands, steam curling in the low-country air. His 17-year-old grandson, Eli, was still asleep inside. The boy was half Haitian, his skin the color of dark mahogany, with eyes that held more world-weariness than anyone his age ought to carry. Morgan didn't open the envelope at first. He just stared at it. The last time he'd seen one like it, he was a young man, just back from Selma, marching boots still scuffed with Alabama dust. Back then, the government mailed threats, not invitations. He set his mug down, peeled open the seal, and froze. Notice of imminent removal, issued in error of citizenship verification. Eli was being deported. Morgan blinked once. Twice. Then read it again. Your permanent resident file has been flagged as non-compliant. Evidence of false documentation submitted in 2013. Subject is scheduled for removal within 21 days. He read it a fourth time before the rage finally crept in, slow, steady, dangerous. Because Morgan Freeman knew damn well that his grandson had been born on American soil, in Georgia. His daughter, Eli's mother, had fled political turmoil in Port-au-Prince when she was pregnant. The birth certificate was filed at Savannah Regional Hospital. He held the baby in his arms. He signed the form himself. And yet, here it was. In print. The system was trying to erase the boy. Eli shuffled onto the porch 20 minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Grandpa." Morgan said nothing. He just handed him the letter. Eli read it in silence. When he looked up, his face was unreadable. "They finally found a way to tell me I don't belong," he said. Morgan's voice came low and deliberate. "You were born here. You have every right to be here." Eli shrugged. "Not according to them." That night, Morgan made one call. To a woman named Viola Stokes, a civil rights attorney he'd marched with in '68. She was retired now, but her mind was sharper than a Damascus blade. "Morgan," she said on speaker, "this ain't no paperwork error. It's happening all over the country. They're scanning birth records, targeting kids with dual heritage flags. Haitian, Sudanese, Dominican. It's racist profiling wrapped in legal language. I want it stopped," Morgan growled. Viola sighed. "Then we go to court. But we'll need witnesses, documents, media, and fast." Morgan looked at Eli, who sat slumped on the stairs, headphones on, eyes distant. "We'll bring hell if we have to." The next morning, they visited the county records office. "I need a certified birth certificate for Eli Freeman," Morgan said to the clerk, a young woman with nail polish and a Bluetooth headset. She clicked away, then frowned. "There's no file under that name." Morgan leaned in. "Check again." "I did, sir. There's a record of admission to the hospital, but the state never validated the certificate. It's listed as pending. There's a secondary review flag dated 2013. Morgan's stomach dropped. That was the year Eli's mother died. The state had never finalized the paperwork. Outside, Eli lit a cigarette. Morgan snatched it from his hand. "Don't do that," he said. "I'm not your son," Eli snapped. "No," Morgan said. "You're my grandson. And that means something." Eli turned away, voice tight. "Means I'll be deported from a country I was born in, because some bureaucrat didn't press save." Morgan put a hand on his shoulder. "They don't get to delete us, son. Not again. I've lived through this once before, dogs, hoses, names spat like bullets. We didn't kneel then, and we won't now." That night, Morgan opened an old cedar trunk in the attic. Inside were newspaper clippings, FBI surveillance photos from the '60s, old NAACP files. He pulled out a faded Polaroid, Eli's mother, holding a newborn, grinning in the hospital bed. And beneath it, a signed affidavit from the attending nurse. It wasn't just history anymore. It was evidence. The courthouse in Savannah hadn't changed much since 1971. Same marble columns. Same slow-turning fans above the gallery. Same faint scent of floor polish and stale coffee. But Morgan Freeman didn't come to admire nostalgia. He came to make sure his grandson wasn't erased from history. Viola Stokes, sharp as ever in a blue suit and orthopedic heels, stood beside Morgan as they passed through security. Eli walked behind them, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched. The boy was scared, but not the trembling kind. No, this was the silent storm kind. The kind Morgan had seen in Malcolm's eyes the day before he was shot. They entered courtroom 3C, where a young immigration judge with a buzz cut and a granite expression sat behind the bench. Behind the prosecution table sat a man in a black government suit. His name was Curtis Harlan, a cold-eyed officer from ICE. Morgan's gaze met his for a split second. It was the same look he'd seen in Mississippi when they said, "You people don't belong here." Court is now in session for the matter of United States versus Eli Freeman. Viola stood calmly, voice firm. "Your Honor, we assert that this entire case is based on a bureaucratic failure, not a fraudulent act. The child in question was born in Savannah, Georgia. We have an affidavit from the hospital nurse, dated and signed. We have photographs. Witnesses." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Where's the official birth certificate?" Viola didn't flinch. The state never finalized it. The mother died 6 months after birth. No one followed up. Harlan leaned forward. "Intentional omission, Your Honor. Common tactic among undocumented parents trying to pass off foreign-born children as native. No legal record means no citizenship." Morgan stood up without being asked. "I was there. I signed the form myself. I held that boy the day he came into this world." The judge rapped his gavel. "Sir, you're not allowed to speak unless called." Viola held up a hand. "Your Honor, this man is not only a legal guardian, he is a living witness to the child's birth. You can strike it from the record, but you can't strike it from history." Outside the courthouse, a crowd was growing. It started with a few local activists. Then reporters. Then camera crews. A woman with a handmade sign that read, "Morgan Freeman's grandson is not illegal." The news was spreading fast. And Gerald Pickens, a Georgia congressman with presidential ambitions, was watching. From his office in Atlanta, he turned to his aide. "Get me that judge's number. If this boy stays, it'll reopen every birth case from the last 20 years. We can't let that door swing." Back in the courtroom, ICE officer Harlan played his final card. "We have surveillance footage of Mr. Freeman leaving the country with his grandson at age 6, crossing into Haiti and returning weeks later with no re-entry stamp for the boy. That nullifies his claim." Viola blinked. That was a funeral trip. And they re-entered through Jacksonville with a family emergency override, which is legal under subsection 28. Harlan shrugged. "No proof of that override on record." Viola turned to Morgan. He reached into his coat pocket and slowly pulled out a laminated folder. Inside, a copy of the override order, signed by a DHS supervisor, and a photo of Eli standing beside his mother's coffin. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge swallowed hard. The judge recessed. But outside, tension boiled. As Morgan stepped onto the courthouse steps, an ICE van pulled up to the curb. 2 uniformed officers jumped out. "We have federal authority to detain Eli Freeman," one barked. "We believe he's a flight risk." Morgan stepped in front of his grandson. "You'll have to go through me first." The officer stepped closer. "That can be arranged, sir." And then, the crowd reacted. Phones went up. Dozens of them. Filming. Streaming. And a voice in the crowd shouted, "Don't touch that boy." Another, "We're watching you." And then someone handed Morgan a megaphone. He hadn't touched one of these since the March on Washington. He didn't hesitate. I fought this battle 60 years ago. We wore out our shoes marching to make this country admit what it already knew, that we were citizens. That we were human. And now I'm standing here watching the government try to undo that in front of my eyes. People quieted. Tourists stopped. Even the ICE officers looked uncertain. Morgan turned to face the cameras. My grandson was born here. His skin may remind you of somewhere else, but his roots are in this soil. Just like mine. Just like yours. If they can try to erase him, they can erase any of us. The crowd erupted in applause. And someone yelled, "You're not just speaking for him. You're speaking for all of us." That night, the clip went viral. 70 million views. Morgan's speech aired on every network. #EliIsAmerican trended worldwide. And the next morning, the White House press secretary was asked, "Does the president believe Eli Freeman should be deported?" She paused. Then said, "The president believes justice must prevail." The courthouse victory, if you could call it that, lasted 36 hours. That was all it took for the cracks to start showing. On the third morning, Morgan Freeman opened his front door to find a sleek, unmarked envelope on the porch bench, no postage, no return address. Inside was a single page. "Drop the case. We'll clear the flag on Eli's citizenship." Quietly. Below the typed message, a handwritten note. "You win the boy. We keep the system." Morgan stared at the paper for a long while, then folded it in half and set it in the fire pit without a word. The flames curled around it like hungry fingers. Meanwhile, Viola was in her office across town, leafing through legal filings when a name caught her attention. Terry Roslin. Filed as friend of the court. Attached to a legal motion challenging the authenticity of the birth affidavit. Terry Roslin was a retired hospital administrator and the person who had once validated Eli's birth record. Now he was retracting it. She picked up the phone and called Morgan. "Something stinks." Morgan already knew. Later that evening, Morgan and Eli met Viola in her dim-lit kitchen. She dropped the papers on the table. "Terry's being pressured. Either they promised him money or they found something on him. Because this right here undermines our entire timeline." Eli sank into a chair. "So it's all gone?" "No," Morgan said. "It just means we have to dig deeper. Harder." But Viola looked hesitant. "There's something else." She turned her iPad toward them. A video was paused on screen. A security camera still. Eli. Walking into the courthouse. Alone. Timestamp, 7:18 a.m. 40 minutes before court opened. His hoodie is up, and under his arm, a manila envelope. The caption under the leaked image read, "Was Eli Freeman trying to tamper with evidence?" The video had been posted anonymously, then amplified by bots and fake accounts. Within hours it was trending. #Freeman fraud. Eli's voice was small. That's not even me." Morgan looked closer. The posture was wrong. The shoulders were broader. But the resemblance was deliberate. Viola nodded. "Deep fake. High quality. We traced the metadata. The original file was edited on a government server in Atlanta." Morgan leaned back in his chair. "Congressman Pickens." The next day, a black Lincoln pulled into Morgan's driveway. A woman stepped out in a crisp beige suit and soft heels. Her voice was polite, but her smile had corners. "Mr. Freeman. I represent the Office of Legal Stabilization under Homeland Affairs." "Sounds important," Morgan said flatly. "It is. I came with an offer." She handed him a folder, this one with a seal. Inside, a legal agreement. Non-disclosure accord. In exchange for full restoration of Eli Freeman's citizenship, parties will agree to refrain from further public statements or litigation regarding said case. Morgan set the folder down. "You want us to pretend this never happened?" She smiled softly. "No one needs to lose anything else. Your grandson gets his future. You get your peace. The system doesn't take another blow. Everyone walks away whole. Morgan studied her carefully. You ever bury a friend who bled for voting rights? You ever ride a bus through Mississippi with no bathroom breaks because of your skin? You ever lie to a child and tell him this country won't hurt him? The woman didn't answer. He stepped forward. You're not offering peace. You're offering silence. She left without a word. That night, Morgan sat with Eli on the porch. The air was thick with the scent of magnolia and something unspoken. They're giving us a way out, Eli said quietly. Morgan didn't look at him. Yes. And hoping we take it, so they never have to change. Eli was quiet. Then, what if we say yes? What if I just want to live my life and not be someone's symbol? Morgan turned to him, voice softer now. Then you'll have that life. I'll stand by you either way. But Eli's voice was shaking now. I don't want you to fight for me anymore. I want to fight for me. Morgan's eyes welled for the first time. You sound like your mother. The next morning, Eli took the microphone. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, expecting Morgan, as usual. But it was Eli who stepped up. I'm not here to make you comfortable, he began. I'm here to tell you that this country told me I didn't belong. That I was a glitch. A file to be corrected. A mistake to be deported. He held up the unsigned non-disclosure agreement. They offered me this. Said I could walk free. Just stop talking. He tore it in half. But I was born here. I will not be erased to protect your comfort. The crowd erupted. Inside the courthouse, Pickens watched the feed from his office. His aide leaned in. Sir, the boy's trending again. Pickens closed his laptop. And for the first time in his career, he felt the weight of a name he couldn't silence. The Supreme Court accepted the case 3 weeks later. It made no front pages. No flashy headline. Just a quiet entry in a public docket. Freeman v. U.S. Department of Homeland Affairs. Question: can citizenship be retroactively denied due to administrative error in state birth records? It was a legal formality to most. But to Morgan Freeman, it was the resurrection of every march, every baton blow, every name etched into the walls of injustice. For Eli, it was something deeper. A test of who he was. Not just legally, but spiritually. And Morgan knew that weight well. Because he'd carried it himself, from the church basements of Birmingham to the front lines of Montgomery. You ever think it would come to this? Viola asked, setting a thick binder down in Morgan's den. Morgan sighed. I thought we'd made more progress by now. But racism doesn't vanish, it just gets better at hiding in plain sight. She nodded solemnly. And now it hides behind keyboards and government seals. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Viola cleared her throat. There's something else. You remember Charles Tisdale? Morgan blinked. Charlie Tisdale? From the movement? Yeah. Civil Rights Coalition. Atlanta chapter. Morgan's face tightened. What about him? Viola opened a folder. He's the one who leaked the fake footage. Silence dropped like a thunderclap. Morgan stood slowly, his voice a whisper. Charlie? He marched with us. Viola nodded. Until he didn't. Pickens bought him out years ago. Runs PR for his campaign now. Morgan looked down at the floor. That man once stood shoulder to shoulder with Medgar Evers. And now, Viola said, he sells fear. That night, Morgan sat with Eli by the fireplace. The boy had his feet tucked under him, hoodie on, quiet. They're going to drag my name through the mud again, aren't they? Eli said. Morgan stared into the flames. Yes. But this time, you're not the boy in the system. You're the one putting the system on trial. Eli was silent. Then, do you ever regret not walking away? Morgan looked up slowly. No, he said. What I regret is that I'm still having to walk. At dawn, Morgan visited his old friend, Josephine Calhoun. She was 92 and sharp as a hawk. She lived in a quiet home just outside Macon, her porch full of old campaign buttons and faded photographs. One of them, Morgan and Joe, arms linked in Selma, 1965. She squinted as he sat down. "You look tired." "I am." "Is it the boy?" Morgan nodded. "He's brave. But they're coming for him with knives dipped in law." Josephine smiled sadly. "Same knives. New hands." Morgan pulled out a letter. "I need a statement. You were the nurse on duty that night. If anyone remembers." She waved her hand. "No need to dig through memory." She stood and returned a minute later with a yellowed hospital ledger, plastic protected, brittle but intact. She flipped it open. There. Patient, Freeman, Eli. Date of birth, January 2nd, 2006. Time, 7:12 a.m. Mother, Aria Freeman. Witnessed by Josephine Calhoun, RN. Morgan stared in silence. Joe grinned. Some of us still believe in keeping records the way God intended, with ink and truth. 2 days before the hearing, Viola's office was broken into. Nothing stolen. No computers touched. Only one thing was moved. The ledger. Morgan arrived first. He found the drawer open and the plastic sleeve gone. Eli stood behind him, fists clenched. "They're scared," he said. "No," Morgan corrected. "They're desperate. Viola called them that evening. I have a backup scan. But without the original, it's only circumstantial." Morgan hung up. Then called one more person. Charlie Tisdale. The man answered on the second ring. "Morgan. Long time. You ever lose sleep, Charlie?" Silence. "I did what I had to do," Charlie finally said. "Pickens is going to be president. You either adapt or you get left behind. You used to believe in justice. I believe in realism now." Morgan's voice lowered. "Then I hope you enjoy sleeping with your realism. But know this, Eli's story is louder than your cowardice." He hung up. And for the first time in years, Morgan wept. The next morning, Eli stepped onto the Supreme Court steps in Washington, D.C. He wore a simple black suit. Morgan walked behind him, not as a shield, but as a legacy. In the courtroom, 9 justices took their seats. The room was full. Cameras were banned, but the world watched nonetheless, through sketches, through tweets, through updates from journalists packed into the gallery. Viola stood. She held up the scan ledger. "This isn't just about a boy and a paper. It's about the soul of our institutions. It's about what it means when the truth is inconvenient. We are not here to defend a mistake. We are here to demand correction." And then she passed the floor to Morgan. He stood slowly. And for a brief moment, every breath in the room held still. "I'm 87 years old," Morgan said. "And I've spent more of those years fighting for the promise of America than enjoying it." He held up the scan ledger. "My grandson was born on Georgia soil, under Georgia sky, in a Georgia hospital. I was there. And now you ask me, does a government stamp matter more than a human witness?" He looked each justice in the eye. "This court is not on trial. But its memory is." The justices filed out of the chamber in silence. No cameras. No commentary. Just the heavy echo of robes brushing against marble and time. Morgan Freeman sat quietly beside Eli, hands folded, eyes closed. He wasn't praying. He had already done enough of that in Montgomery, in Memphis, in back alleys and church basements. This moment didn't need more prayer. It needed remembrance. The next morning, the ruling came in a single-page release. Freeman v. U.S. Department of Homeland Affairs. Ruling, 5-4 in favor of the petitioner. Conclusion: citizenship, once established by birth, cannot be retroactively denied due to administrative error. Eli stood in front of the courthouse steps as reporters flooded him with questions. How does it feel to win? What would you say to other families like yours? Are you planning to sue the government? He raised one hand, and the noise fell away. I wasn't born to be a case file, he said. But I became one because the system decided a paper trail mattered more than a human life. He held up the hospital scan. This document didn't give me a right to be American. Being born here did. Being raised by a man who fought for justice did. What we won today isn't just mine, it belongs to every family whose roots have ever been questioned. And then he stepped back. The crowd applauded. But Morgan wasn't in the crowd. He had walked away from the cameras, down a side street, to where a church bell was tolling noon. He sat on a bench beneath an oak tree and took a long breath. That evening, Congressman Gerald Pickens called a press conference. It was supposed to be damage control. He stood at a podium with the American flag behind him and opened with a line he had rehearsed 30 times. While I respect the court's decision. But halfway through his statement, a protester shouted, You tried to deport a kid born here. Then another. Where's your apology? Then a chant. Eli free man. Eli free man. His face twitched. His jaw tightened. And he walked off camera, defeated not by a courtroom, but by the voice of the people. At home in Savannah, Morgan sat in his study with a photo in hand, Aria, Eli's mother, smiling with her baby boy wrapped in a blue blanket. Eli entered quietly. You okay? Morgan nodded slowly. She would have been proud. Eli took a seat beside him. Of both of us. They sat in silence. The room glowed with warm lamplight. Outside, the cicadas had begun to sing. Then Eli said, I want to use this to help others. Kids who've been flagged. Who don't have anyone to speak up. Morgan looked at him, eyes glinting. You just became more than my grandson, son. He smiled. You became the future. A month later, Eli stood on stage at a community center in Baton Rouge, speaking to a crowd of 200. He had no teleprompter. Just a story. He told them about bureaucracy, about injustice, about fighting back. And about a grandfather who never stopped marching. Morgan watched from the back. He didn't need to be in the spotlight. He had passed the torch, not to a movement, but to a young man who now understood why it was so heavy. He stepped outside into the warm night air and looked up at the stars. They hadn't changed. But maybe, just maybe, the country was starting to.